Good afternoon, everyone. Just gonna pull up my document here. I hope everyone's having a great long weekend. I know for many of you, it probably doesn't feel like a long weekend since we've all been quarantined, but I hope you join me nonetheless. We're gonna be talking about affirming history, especially the affirming history of the United Church of Canada, but more importantly, the affirming history of Robertson Wesley. So if you don't know anything about Robertson Wesley's history, um, today's the day that you learn a little bit about it. So I'm going to see if everyone can hear me. If you're watching, can you hear and see me okay? I know my Wi-Fi has been a little funky lately. I'm just going to edit it because I have some poll questions for you as well. Perfect. And they are ready to go. So as I get started, I just want to do a special thanks to Reverend Karen for providing me with the documents that had a lot of the dates and important information on the affirming process here at Robertson Wesley. And I also want to give a very special thank you to both Colleen Ouellette and Wilson McLennan for taking the time to speak with me over the phone and through email and sharing all of the information that they had because they were part of the committees or helped in some regard. So thank you to you too if you were watching this. I really appreciated the time and the conversations. They were lovely and great, and I learned so much from both of you. So thank you. Part of today, there's going to be 3 sections that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about the affirming history briefly with the United Church of Canada. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Affirm United organization, and then I'm going to end off on the affirming history of Robertson Wesley. So, and there's going to be some poll questions for you all as well, if you're interested in participating in some of those poll questions. So, with the United Church of Canada, at the time of its inception in 1925, the United Church of Canada considered homosexuality a sin among almost every other denomination in the world, and openly LGBTQ persons were rejected as candidates for ministry. It wasn't until the 1970s that these attitudes started to change and shift. And as early as 1977, the United Church of Canada urged the Canadian Parliament to amend the human rights law to protect gay men and lesbians against discrimination. So that was a huge shift that they felt that, gay people should have protections under the Human Rights Act, which didn't get amended until I believe it was 1979. It wasn't until August 17th of 1980 when the United Church of Canada's task force released a report called God's Image to report on sexual ethics. It stated in this report that there is no reason in principle why mature, self-accepting homosexuals, any more than mature, self-accepting heterosexuals, should not be ordained or commissioned. And then that same year, however, an openly lesbian candidate who applied to be a minister was rejected. So now, as we get here, I'm going to publish the first poll. So this poll here says, the question is, when did the United Church of Canada vote to allow gay and lesbian ministers? And there's 3 years there you can choose from, 1982, 1988, or 1990. So I'll wait a few seconds for you to vote there. You should see it at the bottom of your screen. We'll see if anyone gets it. So it's after 1980, which is when that God's Image report was released. See if any of you. No votes yet? No guesses? No worries. All right, so we got no guesses yet. That's okay. We'll definitely have a few more questions for you to answer. Hopefully, you guys can just guess anyway. So the answer for when did the United Church of Canada vote to allow gay and lesbian ministers was 1988. So in 1988, a task force released a report called Gift, Dilemma, and Promise, a report and affirmations of human sexuality. And in this report, it stated that all human beings, regardless of sexual orientation, are persons made in the image of God, and recommended that the church welcome sexually active gay men, lesbians, and bisexuals into all aspects of the church, including ministry. So this all happened in 88. Later that year, during the 32nd General Council, they passed a statement called the Membership, Ministry, and Human Sexuality. And this statement stated that all persons, regardless of sexual orientation, who profess their faith in Jesus Christ are welcomed to be or become members of the United Church of Canada, and that all members of the United Church are eligible to be considered for ordained ministry. And so taken together, these two statements open the door for openly gay men and women to join the ministry for the first time. During this, though, many members were opposed to this vote. We often hear it as the vote of 88. And over the next 4 years after the vote, membership fell by almost 80,000 people. And in most cases, entire congregations split with a sizable faction, and sometimes led by the minister, leaving to form an independent church. And some of those opposed to the gay ordination issue chose to stay in the church, but then they formed a committee of concern called A Voice of Conservatism within the church. I'm not sure how long that committee lasted or if it's still around, but yeah, so there was a huge shift and split in the church when this vote happened. Here we have a second question here. And don't worry, if you're watching this later, you could still be able to vote after the live video. So this one, the question at the bottom of your screen says, when did the first openly gay minister get ordained? So the three answers that you can choose from is 1988, 1990, or 1992. I'll give a few moments to see if anyone is willing to guess for this one. And if not, that's totally okay. And like I said, if you're watching this later, you can still vote. Gotta get that coffee. All right, no takers yet. So the answer for this one is on May 24th of 1992, which is the answer. A man named Tin Stevenson was the first openly gay minister ordained by the United Church of Canada. And in 2005, the church urged the Canadian Parliament again, but this time in favor to vote for the same-sex marriage legislation. So after the legislation had been passed, the church urged the government not to reopen the issue. And we're going to do another poll question here. I see that someone voted for 1990. Close. It was 2 years after that. This one here is, when did the United Church of Canada have their first openly gay moderator? And moderators, from what I can recall, I'm still pretty new to all this church lingo, is part of the council for that. So when did the United Church of Canada have their first openly gay moderator? This one I find is very tricky, for sure. So I'll give a few seconds for this one. If anyone wants to give a quick guess, it should be at the bottom of your screen. There's three answers: 1995, 2005, or 2012. See if we can get a vote here. Nothing yet, but I know they're coming in a little bit late, so I might be a little ahead. That's okay. For this one, the answer is 2012. Oh, we got to vote for 2005. Close, yeah. It was actually 2012, which I thought personally was very, very late in the game. But I guess, you know, being a moderator, there's less chances of doing that rather than being an ordained minister. So yeah, in 2012, for the 41st General Council, they elected a man named Gary Patterson, who was the first openly gay moderator, which is very cool. And since then, the United Church has always been seen or known as the more liberal denomination or the most accepting. And with that, I'm going to transition into talking a little bit about Affirm United. So many of you may know of Affirm United. It is a justice-oriented organization of people in the United Church of Canada who have created this program for congregations and individuals to follow. And then once they follow this program, they're then elected to be called in an affirming ministry. So I got one more poll question here at the bottom. And then we have one more after this. So this is your second last voting chance. So when was Affirm United created? So there's three options here. There's 1982, 1990, and 2001. So Affirm United is still around today. Robertson Wesley used the Affirm United's process, and I myself use it when I'm helping congregations all around the Northern Spirit region. So we'll see if there's any votes here. I may have to move on and get those votes in after. But for this one, if you're watching later, you can still vote. Affirm United was created actually in 1982, which I thought was very strange because this was before the big vote in '88. But nonetheless, the group, or Affirm itself, it wasn't called Affirm United at this time, it was called Affirm. And so Affirm was created by a group of clergy who met in Montreal because there was fear that they may lose their jobs as being LGBTQ folks. Affirm was formed to support individual lesbian and gay members of the United Church of Canada and to advocate with the church for their full inclusion. And later on, Affirm worked with the support of another organization called Allies Within Friends of Affirm, which was a separate organization. And it wasn't until 2001 that these two organizations combined, and that's when Affirm United, as we know it, was named and created and still exists. So Affirm United still works for the full inclusion of people of all gender identities and sexual orientations, and in the United Church of Canada and in Canadian society as well. Affirm United works in partnership with the United Church of Canada, but it is still independent, so it's not part of the United Church of Canada, but it is independent from, but still works closely with United Church of Canada, and it is a volunteer-led movement, which I think is really great. All of the affirming coordinators through Affirm United are all volunteers. I think they only have one staff person that helps with management and getting stuff out. And it still has importance and value to this day. Affirm United is still really great. It has awesome resources. Their Open Hearts document is something that I've read many times and I use almost every day with my work as the affirming coordinator here at Edmonton. So Affirm United is great. That's a little bit of the history of them. Now, I'm going to move on to our last segment, which is our Robertson Wesley United Church's history with being affirming. So, yeah, I'm going to do, no, I'm going to wait. No, I'm going to post it. Last poll question. Let's do it. So, when did Robertson Wesley become affirming? So, many of you might know this. Some of you might not, and that's totally okay. Ooh, I got some comments here. Let me just see these. Anne Marie 1990. I'm not sure. I can't remember which one you were referencing there. But this one, the question is, when did Robertson Wesley become affirming? And there's three options here. It's 2006, 2008, and 2009. So let's see if anyone can guess the right one here. If you may know. Some of you may not know. I know I didn't know. I should have known. So even doing this live stream has helped me a whole bunch as well. All right. I'm going to publish this one. Still feel free to vote for that. And we'll see. So Robertson Wesley. Let's talk a little bit about before the affirming process at Robertson Wesley. But where was Robertson Wesley at in regards. Oh, 2009. Oh, that's the correct one. Whoever voted for that, you're correct. We'll get there. Robertson Wesley was already a pretty welcoming and affirming congregation. They had already had a statement of welcome and inclusion that was created back in 2003, and they've had that for a long time. Obviously, things have been updated and changed. They even had the board approve same-sex marriage back in 2005 when it became legal here in Canada. Robertson Wesley also had many different LGBTQ programs that were happening at the time as well, and had participated in the Pride Parade in previous years, along with some of the other United churches in the city. Now, what did the affirming process look like in Robertson Wesley? So the process officially started in early 2008 when the congregation and the board wanted to start walking the talk, per se. And then it was me. Oh, good job, Rich. And that first Sunday, they had a sermon that was about accepting the other. The process was more of an invitation to people to learn and grow, rather than a demand from LGBTQ folks. So many of the congregations and board members stated that they would rather be proactive in being affirming rather than waiting for an LGBTQ member to come and say, hey, I'd like you guys to do this. So it was more of an invitation rather than a demand. At the time, Reverend James Ravencroft started a book study called Draw the Circle Wide, which helped catalyze the start of the process. And there were other programs such as Soul Outing and A Queer Sight to See that helped catalyze the process as well. According to some folks, most of the stuff that Affirm United needed from Robertson Wesley was already done in previous years. So many of the things that are required to be affirming ministry is having a inclusive marriage statement, a statement of welcome and inclusion, which were two things that Robertson Wesley already had done in the past. And so all that was needed was time for education and storytelling. And so all throughout 2008, was Robertson Wesley's time for education, exploration, and to come up with a plan for their future years. They listened to stories and heard from speakers from all different perspectives. They had friends of LGBTQ folks, they had allies, they had parents, and they even had LGBTQ people come in and speak, as well as their own congregants who were willing to speak, kind of share the little bit about themselves and share some education around it. There was even some folks from around the neighborhood in Glenora that were part of this process and were often welcomed and invited into some of these educational sessions, and which was very great because I heard a story where some of the ladies who were in the community who didn't actively go to Robertson Wesley but were still part of some of the programs say things such as, I'm glad you were doing this. There was a lady whose son had died of AIDS, and she felt like she couldn't talk about it. And when she came to Robertson Wesley for part of this process, she felt like she could talk about it and she could share the pain that she felt with her son, dying of AIDS and being gay. And there was another lady whose daughter was a lesbian and opened up about her daughter and her spouse and those kind of things. And so for a lot of people, this process opened up a lot of doors that they didn't even realize were closed for many people, and opened up a lot of parts of people's lives that people didn't know about, which I think was absolutely amazing. So those stories definitely made me tear up. I love those kind of stories. Some of the resistance for Robertson Wesley's affirming process, there was a very a lower vote than I expected. It was about 87% of the votes said yes. Many of the arguments that people made weren't so much transphobic or homophobic, but it was more so very general concerns, such as, the statement of why be affirming if we're already welcoming. I know I've heard that many, many times in other congregations as well. There were some friends who were saying stuff that surprised people. A lot of people were afraid that their families or neighbors would not attend church with them anymore, or they didn't know how to tell their friends and neighbors if they were attending an affirming church. A lot of people had fear of losing members or having Robertson Wesley become the gay church. And so these are all very logical and yeah, they were pretty much logical fears that a lot of congregations still have today. And these questions are, I think, personally, easily answered. It just takes the time to kind of process a lot of these changes that happen. Some of the important aspects of Robertson Wesley that happened during the affirming process is there was a lot of logical arguments and discussion. A lot of people felt that the whole process itself was very insightful, very engaging. They mentioned that there was a huge collective group of people who were working on the affirming process together. There was no present group of people. It just kind of like happened naturally. People wanted to help, people wanted to participate. Everyone was allowed to participate in this. They even stated that the group itself was very diverse, with people who were young, who were old, who were gay, who were straight. And the fact is that this process even allowed individuals and the congregation to take a stand with their beliefs. And instead of just going along with the flow, it felt that this process and becoming affirming really made them dig deep and speak out for who we are as Robertson Wesley. And they wanted to have that label and to take a stand for the affirming process and to show the community and the wider Christian community as well that being affirming is okay. And so this process really forced Robertson Wesley to make a choice, and I personally think they made the right one. Robertson Wesley is a very welcoming and opening space. So during the entirety of the affirming process, from what I've heard, it seemed to be a relatively peaceful process. There was not a lot of controversies because Robertson Wesley was so welcoming and inclusive way before that, in many, many years before the actual affirming process. But the process itself actually took about 1.5 to 2 years to complete. And the vote passed, like I said, with 87 of the voters saying yes. And officially on June 7th of 2009, Robertson Wesley became an affirming congregation and still is to this day. I wish I could have been there. Unfortunately, I was 13, 12 at the time, so I wasn't really involved in churches back then. Another important conversation to kind of talk about is when I was doing some interviews with people, I often ask kind of where was the trans and non-binary identities within this whole process, because in 2009, 2008, a lot of the trans, non-binary discussions, gender identity discussions weren't as big as they are today. And so I asked kind of where did those fit in the conversation. And so a lot of people mentioned that, sexual identity and gender identity were involved in the educational process and was discussed, but there wasn't a lot of focus on trans and non-binary identities. There was a lot of talk about, updating the statement of welcome and inclusion to give out a broader welcome for gender diverse folks. They even wanted to take a step further and adding transgender to the statement. And so this discussion came up a lot, but it was more of a future endeavor to be more inclusive when it came to gender diverse folks. And we even see that throughout the years, where originally it was, gay people or homosexuals, and then it changed to LGBT, and then LGBTQ, and then LGBTQ2SIA+. And so over the years, the statements of welcome inclusion and the education behind it has grown massively to include almost every identity and gender identity and sexual orientation now. So after the process, the Robertson Wesley joined with a few other congregations. There was 3 other congregations at the time. There was St. Paul, Southminster Steinhauer, and Mill Woods, and then Robertson Wesley was the 4th one in Edmonton to become affirming. Post-vote with Affirming United, Robertson Wesley was very serious for a bit in their affirming plans and events. But then some people said that it just became a normal aspect of church life, and so they felt like there wasn't a lot of active events or active educational aspects, but there was a huge public presence that was there at Robertson Wesley, especially in having programs like soul outing, being at Robertson Wesley, having LGBTQ ministers, and yeah, and then eventually, the Robertson Wesley became the home of the affirming coordinator position, which originally had Mark Chang, and then now myself being in this role. And so I'm very blessed to be in this role and to be part of the Robertson Wesley family and to share this history. Um, and yeah, and so now post vote, post process, now our statement of welcome and inclusion states this. In response to God's call, we, congregation of Robertson Wesley United Church, declare our commitment to opening our hearts and our church family to all people in our community, regardless of sexual orientation, age, gender identity, differing abilities, ethnicity, or economic circumstance. We recognize that many people's lives continue to be devastated by hatred, prejudice, and inequality. Therefore, as a compassionate and caring spiritual community, we will stand with those who are adversely affected by injustice, alienation, and oppression. And so the history of Affirm United and Robertson Wesley show huge change, huge growth, especially with the United Church, originally thinking homosexuality is a sin, and now being the most inclusive congregation or denomination, in all of Canada. And making the change of, speaking out with the government to make these changes for including LGBTQ folks in the Human Rights Act, advocating for same-sex marriage legislation, having openly gay ministers for the first time in '88, to the creation of Affirm United in 1982. And having their work be very important and very valuable throughout all of Canada and all United Churches, even today. And then Robertson Wesley, being a very welcoming and inclusive church for many, many years, and to officially become affirming in 2009 is a huge step for them, because now Robertson Wesley is labeled as an affirming congregation, and people on the outside like myself, or any other folks who may not be born into Christianity or religion in general, can see those signs and symbols and know, hey, that's a safe space. So thank you for joining me with this quick overview of the history of Robertson Wesley and the United Church at large. I really had a great time speaking with Colleen and Wilson and Karen about all of this stuff. I learned a lot myself, and I hope you all learned a little bit too. I think it's very important to kind of talk about our history in the Affirm process. So yeah, thank you for joining me and listening to me ramble on about history and participating in the votes. So yeah, I hope everyone has a great long weekend. I know today is a holiday, so please take care of yourselves, rest up, get outside, keep practicing social distancing, and I will see you all next Monday. Take care, everyone.